Right, hello, good morning everyone. We are live from a surprisingly sunny Leeds in West Yorkshire in the UK. Just to sort of get straight into the point, the purpose of today's webinar is to talk through innovative solutions that are being adapted by utilities, and obviously innovative solutions that hopefully can help mitigate the impacts of water scarcity. So, quick small disclaimer that I'm not expecting utilities, and we're certainly not expecting utilities to combat the whole water scarcity thing. There's a range of issues. It's a very complex issue, and I can fully appreciate that water utilities are not going to be the sole solution to water scarcity. There's a number of issues there, but the purpose of this discussion is to discuss what those utilities can be doing, what they are doing, and what they maybe will be doing in the future. So, as a first start, I'll obviously pass over to our panel individually, just as a quick sort of 60-second introduction to yourself, and obviously the work that you do, and then from there we'll go into what we'll be discussing. So, Dragan, if you want to sort of kick us off.
Okay, my name is Dragan Savic, and I'm the CEO at KWR Water Research Institute in the Netherlands, which is the Dutch Drinking Water Companies Institute. We're independent organization and non-for-profit, but still a company. My background is I've been a professor at the University of Exeter, professor of hydroinformatics or water informatics, involved in research and education there. So that's probably enough for the start.
Simon, again, quick sort of 60-second introduction of yourself.
Sure, yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Lyle. Thank you, Dragan. So I'm Simon Ayley. I'm Director of Water Environment at WRC. We are the Water Research Centre in the UK, focusing really on knowledge transfer to solve technical and scientific challenges across the water and wastewater sector, as well as gas and waste and resources sectors that we focus on as well. My personal background is I'm a chemical engineer, and I like solving problems. Thanks.
And then finally, Gordon, again, just a quick introduction of yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Lyle. Hopefully you can hear me okay, and my internet is holding up. I'm the head of sustainability at Yorkshire Water, so hopefully I can give you that insight, at least from the water utility perspective this morning. Particularly for me, I drive change across our business and increasingly across the UK water sector, especially with a focus on carbon and our commitment to net zero by 2030, but equally across climate resilience, circular economy, all the key sustainability trends.
Great stuff. So as a way of kicking things off, then water scarcity more generally is obviously the lack of available water to everybody globally. As we sort of say at the beginning, there are multiple issues, multiple solutions that can combat what is a very complex problem. I'd be very keen to understand what the main challenges are currently of water utilities, not only in the UK but globally. What the main challenges that they're having are, and obviously what they're doing currently to sort of promote better sustainability, better water management at the end of the day. So I suppose, Dragan, if we could start off with you, what do you see as the main problems that utilities are facing today?
Sorry, Lyle, I can't hear you if you can hear me. You've dropped out.
Like I could hear you, so no problem with that. So the key, obviously, with scarcity is temporal and spatial kind of distribution of resources and demand. And you have countries like the Netherlands and the UK where also the perception is a problem, where we think, it's coming down from the skies. Why don't we have enough water? Like, for example, in the southeast of the country, or there are quite a few problems. So the water doesn't, or water resources don't always coincide where the people are, and also that we have the situation that time-wise you have mostly, for example, rainfall in the winter months, autumn winter months, where as you have higher need or higher demands in the summer. But that's just the global kind of situation. And then we have local situations, countries who are close to the coast and seas and oceans. You have the ingress of salt water and brackish water, and that causes quite a lot of problems for those who are exploiting those, but also opportunities to better manage groundwater. So, and as I said, the perception is also, you have diversity in how much people are using or wasting water in the world. Again, globally, looking globally, that we need to look more into how to reduce the use, how to recycle more and reuse of that water. And the fact that we kind of flush down the toilet, 30% of water supplies that been cleaned to the highest possible level. And again, I'm talking about Western countries like the Netherlands and the UK, and then it goes straight through the toilet. So that's in very short where we are with scarcity.
Yeah, no, okay. Thanks very much for that. And Simon, then, similar questions. What do you think currently are the main challenges that utilities are facing?
I think firstly, I'll be careful not to repeat what Dragan's just said, because I wholeheartedly agree with all of that. Taking it one step further, there is a link between water scarcity and energy. So we've got solutions to get water, we've got solutions to clean it up. And I wholeheartedly agree that we're cleaning and treating water to a level that is not necessary for some of the use. In fact, arguably the majority of the use. The amount of clean drinking water that goes and gets used in agriculture across not just the UK, but across the world is phenomenal. And it doesn't need to be that clean. So I think we need to look at that. The link to energy and net zero is really interesting, that a lot of the developing countries are ones where perhaps water from rainfall is not as accessible. Hence, desalination is very common practice around the world. It's been around successfully for years. But the drivers of net zero are there firmly to make sure that we use clean and renewable energy sources and to stop emitting greenhouse gases. So you can't separate the water scarcity issues, I think, from energy and from net zero. They're integral. Some of the developments that we're looking at in the Middle East at the moment with more environmentally and sustainable solutions for desal, such as solar water and desalinator and other type technologies, those really are, I think, a step forward to helping to solve the water scarcity problem. But we still can't get away from the fact, and Dragan, I think you mentioned it there, you mentioned that the reduce, the reuse, the recycle type approaches, consumers need to use less, and agriculture and industry, I think, needs to use water of an appropriate quality for their needs. And that, I think, will be a key factor in solving the scarcity problem. Yeah,
no, I certainly agree. It's obviously something that it's not like, as I mentioned, it's certainly not one that has a simple solution. It's going to be a combination of multiple quite complex solutions that will ultimately mitigate the problem that what is a very global problem. We definitely seem to have we've lost Gordon, but hopefully he'll be joining us when his internet picks back up. So you mentioned obviously like the reuse and recycling side of things, which you do see more and more examples of, but what would you say are the main challenges of implementing reuse and recycling strategies at a utility level? And I suppose if we direct that to Simon, you were just mentioning that, and then Dragan, obviously, if you've got any follow-up points, we can go from there.
Yes, there's some really good technical solutions out there now to cover this. Very proven. There's people making them. all kinds of different technologies and budgets, etc. So that the technology is good. It's commercially available. I think there are broadly two main challenges. The first, which links to a lot of these issues, is consumer behaviour, particularly as ultimately, what would be lovely to see is our wastewater, which is in some cases drinkable, our wastewater flowing back more directly to consumers, particularly on a local level. So I think there's that recycle option there, but that takes a huge shift in consumer behaviour. The other bit, of course, is our built environment. So the houses that we live in and the places that we work, and their suitability for installing technology to harvest, to reuse and recycle on a local level. We haven't got that much new housing stock in the UK, certainly, and we therefore need a commercial model and a technical solution that can be retrofitted affordably to people's homes. There are some good technologies out there, but they still, as it stands at the moment, they would still require a homeowner to invest to install them. So the only people that are really installing them are, at the moment, are homeowners with a passion for saving water and caring for the environment at a really strong level. The water companies aren't mandated to do that by regulation, and household developers are not yet mandated, to my knowledge, in that way either. If that becomes law, then I think we can see a real shift to what can be done to reuse and recycle on the local level. And I think that would be a massive step forward. Yeah.
Okay, and we'll let sort of Dragan jump in, and then we'll shift to Simon. To Gordon. Obviously, who will have first-hand experience of this. But further to that, then, Dragan, what do you see as the sort of main issues when it comes to reuse and recycling?
I think Simon put the finger on it. We've got the technology, and quite often technologists feel this is the only thing that we need, and we need to take people along with the technology, and that's where the perceptions and the attitudes toward recycling come in. And then it's the cost. So that's another barrier. And then Simon mentioned laws, regulation. If we have all of those in place, then we have the whole system that will allow that to recycle. So, for example, if you look waste recycling, those municipalities that have sorted it out, they're doing quite a large proportion of waste recycling, but we don't do it everywhere. So it's the same with water. And I would just go back and say, water is central, not just to energy, but it's to food. 70% globally of water is being used for irrigation, quite often inefficiently. So I can see that at one point in the future, we will have to weigh, how to allocate the limited amounts of water. So luckily, we're working at least in the Western countries, but then we're looking into increased pollution from irrigation and from agriculture. So that's a whole system. We cannot just treat one part of that.
Yeah, okay. And then, Gordon, to welcome you back. Glad to see the internet's picked back up.
Thank you.
We were just talking through how
fingers
crossed, yeah, it stays up. We're just talking through sort of the main challenges of implementing reuse and recycling at a utility level. So with you obviously having first-hand experience with Yorkshire Water, what's been done, from the water company side to implement those sort of strategies?
Lots, I guess, is the one-word answer. Certainly in the UK water sector perspective, but it's interesting to hear some of the European and more international perspective too. But certainly here in the UK, it's kind of core business. So as you would expect, a water utility is all about planning, not only for how we maintain supplies today and tomorrow, but for 25, 50 years ahead. That's very much the infrastructure planning horizon that we work to. And climate projections and so on get very scary in that time horizon if we don't rein things in. But so a range of stuff is open to us. We particularly would talk about both supply and demand options, and particularly a priority to try and just be much more efficient in reducing demand up front, and there's plenty of scope to do that in the UK. We're still relatively inefficient if we really cut to the chase in that, but both within the utility businesses and trying to get leakage in particular down as low as possible is a huge focus for all of the water companies in the UK, and they have been coming down. In Yorkshire, since privatisation about 30 years ago, we've nearly halved leakage, and they're at basically the lowest ever levels we've had. But ultimately, they are still at over 20% or just thereabouts levels of leakage. So that still seems to me as a head of sustainability, that's still my gut instinct is that is very high and needs to come down an awful lot further. But there is a balance and a trade-off in doing all of that when you're talking about very old levels of infrastructure, and therefore you're naturally talking about leaky pipes. And it's one thing to say go and fix all that, but that typically means going and digging up lots of roads, causing loads of congestion and disruption, loads of carbon emissions in all of that activity. So that there's very much a trade-off to be having leakage, and therefore innovation and technology, as I'm sure we'll come on to, is right at the heart of that and deploying that in all sorts of ways. But equally with customers, increasing levels of effort trying to engage customers and educate and support customers to change behaviours and patterns of consumption, and per capita consumption is our measure, and that's typically has been edging up for several decades year on year. I think we're starting to see the peak of that and bringing that back down, and clearly the utility has a role in that, the customer has a role in that, but equally, as you guys were touching on, house building standards is really, water seems largely hidden from house building standards at the moment. There's an increasing energy focus, but water barely seems to get recognised and really seems to be massively turned up in those standards. Interestingly, not in the Treasury's current home improvements as a response to COVID. Again, all about energy actions there. And then ultimately, as a last resort, the UK, relatively on a global scale, has lots of water resources available to it. It's up to us as a nation how we divide those and utilise those across domestic and business kind of water supply needs, but equally agriculture, the environment, and all the other needs that call on that. We have lots of resources if we so wished to access them, and we could do if we came to that. But for me, that's putting more pressure on the environment. That's not really addressing the problem at source, which ultimately I think is where we're all focusing.
It's interesting.
Oh no, yeah, go ahead, Zone.
I was just going to say, Gordon, it's quite interesting what you said there. The water does seem to be out of those discussions relating to climate change and climate predictions. It's all, as you say, it's all focused on energy. And I attended a really good lecture by Chris Stark, the Chief Executive Committee of Climate Change. And his forecast, which informed government announcements a couple of weeks ago, are really telling and really interesting. And it's great to see that the country is moving towards a really good, actually, roadmap towards net zero. So I fully support that. It talks about the greening of the gas grid with hydrogen, biomethane. So that does link into our wastewater sector, and carbon and capture and storage as well, and the combination of those, which is great. Talks about electrification of homes, heating, etc., ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps, and the size of the electricity grid will probably increase tenfold to facilitate this over the next 20 years or so. But nothing about water. And of all these things, it's water that gives us life. So we've got a way to go, I think, with making a sort of policy level, with waving the flag and going, right, hang on a second, water is integral to all of this in people's homes. We could see consumers potentially moving to bundled utilities, of which water could be one of them in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, as well as your broadband and your mobile package. But in order for that to happen, water's got to be linked in with all these discussions, because it's part of it, and water costs energy and potentially impacts the climate when we produce it and treat it. So yeah, really interesting, your comments there. Very interesting.
Yeah, I can also add to this. We are doing quite a lot on green hydrogen at KWR. And we're often asked by water utilities, why are you doing that? That's energy. That's nothing to do with water. But we need to connect that net zero to how we create energy for net zero. And that's one of the elements, for example, green hydrogen. But to go back to Gordon, again, I think in the UK, metering is an obvious choice for interacting with your customer and influencing that demand side of things. Those that are metered on average in the entire country based on Environment Agency data use 17% less water. Very simple solution.
Yeah, the one thing we've not mentioned with all of this though is money.
Yes.
It's always the cost of the investment.
Money at the heart of it. I guess I think just to not to backtrack at all, because I think we do as a society generally undervalue water and it's not loud and clear enough in a national policy context. I think we should take some context that the water industry in the UK is of course really mature in a global sense. We all have 25-year very detailed plans. They're updated every 5 years. They're in a really strict statutory framework. So there is a really high level of planning and resilience that's already there. I guess my nervousness as a head of sustainability is that if you throw in the population growth, the climate projections, the pollution deteriorating our catchments and our supplies, et cetera, we could layer on and layer on. Are we doing enough, I think is my piece. And I guess I worry we look backwards and think the last 30, 50 years have been okay and we've made that work, we made strides in efficiency and in resilience. For me, looking forward to the next 50 years, it's really a step change, and it's not just an incremental innovation and so on that we need. It is a step change innovation to frankly think about the next generation and plan ahead to, yes, it will take money and investment, but equally a lot of that has a good payback and certainly many social and wider benefits, multiple benefits. But equally, I think it's a really strong argument over the kind of decadal view rather than a very short 2 to 5 year view. But full of opportunity, really. Yes, a very clear challenge, but full of opportunity.
So just to jump in on that then, by the sounds of things, regulation plays a pretty big part in the development of the industry more generally. So what are the main challenges in in becoming a more regulated industry? How does the industry sort of take that next step? And I can open that to anyone who wants to answer that? Really. Yeah.
Well, shall I go first as being inside the utility, but I'd be interested in the other guys' additions, as I'm sure they've got perspectives from their angles. For me, the UK water industry, because of its kind of very unique, I think globally unique arrangement of privatised companies, in England at least, privatised companies offering and delivering a very essential public service. I think it's quite a unique arrangement. But if we look across the UK, you've got a different model in Scotland, Northern Ireland and in Wales. So you've got the full spectrum in the UK, and you can see the strengths and weaknesses in some of those approaches. And I think there are strengths and weaknesses in all of them, including in the English privatised sector that does drive out efficiency and innovation at one level. I think the challenge is really a buzzword in the sector is collaboration. And it's absolutely right, perhaps overused, and we all would probably define it differently if we put a definition on it here and now. But I think the kind of underlying premise that we all have a role to play, and it's not just utilities, regulators, national government policy, customers, the whole huge complex water supply chain. All of us have a part in securing that water resilience for the long term and kind of balancing the affordability pressures, and that is a real challenge. We do need to keep water as an essential public good, as Simon was saying. How do we keep that affordable for all, but equally at the same time as really managing down demand, locking in resilience? And I think to the spirit of this call, the answer is innovation and yes, technology, but innovation in its widest forms. So how do we together shape really forward-thinking policies that position us for the long term and move us into the right direction? I think that's very much that's quite a fast-moving field in the water sector, I think.
I think it's very, very fast moving at the moment, Gordon. I think it's accelerating at a rate that perhaps we haven't seen for a number of decades in the sector. I think you mentioned collaboration. Absolutely, to get to net zero, to do everything we want to do, it's got to be about collaboration. In terms of the context of regulation, I wonder if we're going to have to see compromise. Because of the pace of change needed to hit net zero. I don't think we're going to have enough time to cast in stone everything we want to do regulatory to support some changes. So I think the regulators need to work collaboratively to cautiously compromise in certain areas. And that might be in areas where we're looking to use a lower grade water for certain use, which otherwise might have to be treated to Reg 31 or whatever, the relevant drinking water standards. I think that compromise thing is going to be really important. Interesting, I was at a conference in Scotland and I was sat next to a regulator talking about a similar subject. And that person mentioned the word compromise, and I thought that was really interesting that a regulator would use that word. So I think there's an element of compromise needed, and I guess there's the regulatory environment that is at the heart of our industry, and then there's the regulated sectors that are on the periphery that we really need to come on board because they do link into what we're doing. We mentioned housing earlier, and I think that's probably a good example of ways that we might be able to influence change. But it's definitely, I think, a very firm advantage being in such a mature, regulated market in terms of the quality that our customers enjoy. But I think there's going to need to be some compromise over the next few years.
And also looking into different models where, for example, in the Netherlands, you have private but non-for-profit water utilities, and they work in the different physical environment, flat, sandy soils, very different from the UK. You see a different regulatory model. And I think that word collaboration in this case, I would rather see regulation that is not adversarial, that is working with the industry to make those improvements. And historically, I think I'm glad that Gordon mentioned 25-year plans, because these PR review periods, 5-year, where you determine how much you can invest over the next 5 years, have always been a problem for the industry, because it's a cliff edge and then you start all over again. And for me, that was always the impediment to innovation and being long-term or taking a long-term view of the industry.
Yeah, no, it sounds really interesting. Just as a quick segue before we move on, I know we've finally got our LinkedIn Live set up, and there's quite a few people over there. So if there is anyone watching on LinkedIn Live, please do head over to the Crowdcast link. You can obviously post any questions in there. What I'd be keen to move on to then, and Gordon, you mentioned this in particular about sort of leak detection. So with that, obviously, the innovations around the technology that water companies can implement are obviously playing quite a big part. Oh, we've lost Gordon again. But the technology innovations do play a significant part in the way that water is managed. Obviously, that as technology gets better and better, the way that we can water manage obviously is increased. So to what extent do technology innovations, how sort of instrumental are they in ultimately managing water better? Oh, we've got Gordon back.
I'm back. Yeah, sorry, I don't know what's happening. While I'm here, shall I answer that?
May as well.
I dip again. Give you the utility view again. I mean, I mean, it's really rocketed up the agenda over the last few years, and absolutely rightly so. And some really good innovation in, to Dragan's point of how do we kind of face into this and think beyond 5 years and try different approaches and so on. I think the whole sector is moving on that regard, including the regulators, and a really exciting, innovative £200 million fund in the UK led by Ofwat, I think is a really a bold move by them, and really quite exciting to unlock a whole different perspective through that avenue. So that will be interesting to work with and watch. But I mean, technology at one level, absolutely at the heart of this, and I could give you examples about creating really smart water networks. And I think we've put in something like 45,000 meters on the water network over the last couple of years, even less than that really, so that we can have a much more granular understanding of what's going on under our feet that we don't really see very easily, and almost mirror, I forget what there's a term, isn't there? But basically a digital kind of twin, I think, is that the word? But the actual network that we can then manage and kind of run tests through and see what's happening, and remote control and sensoring, I think, is absolutely paramount, particularly for the hidden networks that both water and wastewater. Let's not forget the wastewater half of this as well. That's just as important. So there's definitely all of that. The metering focus that you brought up earlier, I think there is plenty of room to do more metering, and we're chipping away at that. I think there's a bit more debate to be had around the value of that. We see a temporary improvement in water efficiency when we put a meter in, but often that isn't sustained, and behaviours drip back after a year or two. So that's quite an interesting one. And then again, with the energy parallel, the water sector hasn't, in a domestic sense, particularly for meters, we haven't really pursued the smart meter avenue again, which to me comes back to water in the UK is very cheap. It's very hard to make the case for expensive meters. And once you install a meter, there's then a billing increase because it takes more for the water company to go and measure it and read the data and so on and replace it every 8 years. So there is an additive cost that you're then locking into. So there are many complexities to what on the face of it might seem a very obvious no-brainer solution, and actually when you get to the expertise and trying to roll that out, there's all sorts of blockers. But everything from satellite technology, trying to remote sense leakage and targeting that's we found some real success in reducing leakage on that, for example. But equally in land management and how do you keep water clean, and really understand the state of nature out in our catchments. Satellite technology, really interesting. Converting fleet to low carbon sources. Yes, electric vehicles are a lot more prominent now, but hydrogen. Equally, we are trialing a hydrogen water tanker, one of the first in the sector. That could be really interesting for the more heavy goods vehicles ends, etc., etc. There's a million examples of technology being rolled out through the sector in a whole different way. I think the challenge is really how to work through the whole plethora of technology and pull out the real gems and get them innovated and practiced. There's an awful lot of noise, so it's quite hard for a utility to then test the market and work out which is best. That's an activity in itself. And then equally, how do you move from pilots and tests into widespread deployment at scale and pace, not only within one regional water company where they found some success, but then how do you come together nationally and really drive more systemic change? There's an awful lot to it, ultimately, as I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted on this call, I think, but interested to hear what the other guys have to say before I get cut off again.
I think the last sort of points you made there, actually, Gordon, around sort of what technologies, what innovations to back. How do you make those no regrets decisions now? Because we know that they do take time to implement and roll out, not just within one water company or wastewater company, but across a whole country. And I must be talking about the wrong thing because he just left. He's run away. I'll carry on anyway, because Dragan, maybe you want to add something to this. But I think so my background prior to joining water was in the gas sector, actually. So I've lived through 8, 9, 10 years of innovation funding under Ofgem in the UK gas sector. And I've really seen how innovation works. And I've seen gas utility businesses go from not really having a grasp of innovation to actually sort of after 4, 5, 6 years of doing it, proper innovation teams, established business cases, proper systems for evaluating what to do next, how to deliver a successful rollout, and all of the commercials that go with it. I think in the water sector, we're just at that initial stage of we've done innovation in the water sector for a very long time, but now it's about grasping it and making sure it has a business case associated with it, making sure there's a mechanism to roll out and share those successes, not just in individual companies, but around the UK and hopefully internationally. We have to remember that, you know, I think our sector, our country is reasonably well respected on the international stage, and we need to get out there and showcase it. That in turn has an economic benefit for our country as well, because we're selling our services. And with everything that's coming at us at the end of the year, we need to be doing that. So yeah, I don't know if that helps at all. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Dragan.
Well, I would just say that there is no silver bullet technology. All my colleague presenters here are probably aware of a plethora of different technologies, and I think by using the toolbox and investigating which ones, and also collaborating with other utilities, not necessarily always in the UK, to share those experiences, so at least we will make different mistakes, not the same ones as everybody else. So that's one thing. The other thing is technology, again, I'm repeating myself, doesn't go without humans. So, you know, metering, if you put the meter in, yes, people forget that they have it and they go up in, but if you remind them, and there are technologies, digital technologies are out there that we can get in touch with the customer, and the utilities, and particularly the UK utilities, are much better at talking to their customers and engaging them so that they always know what is happening with their consumption or with what they can do for it. So please don't forget that technology is not the solution on its own, but you have to have both your own people from the utility and your customers on board and engaged. And then the technology will work. I fully agree that there are so many of them, but I can guarantee you that somewhere in the world, a company or few companies have tried them. So speak to other utilities as well.
If I could just add to that, I'm really glad you mentioned people, because it's something that I didn't mention, but also in the collaborative space and getting these projects delivered and making change. And we mentioned previously about compromise as well. You know, all these things rely on people. And what I've seen from my previous work in the gas sector is when you get that right team of people together from lots of different utility companies and regulators, it is absolutely amazing what you can achieve, and change will happen. If you don't get the team right, it becomes a bit more business as usual. It ticks along, but perhaps doesn't have the energy it needs. And those high energy teams, I believe, are key to delivering innovation and the change that is needed.
And again, talking about international activities, the Dutch are famous for their water expertise and work all around the world. And I'm pretty sure you've encountered that. We have also to pay attention to the cultural differences, cultural and religious differences, and how water plays the role in it. I don't have to educate you on that, but that's also, you know, from region to region, how we use water. Even in the UK, you have different ethnicity being allocated or being in a part of your utility. You may find out that they're using water a bit different from some other parts of the country.
Just to jump in then, because I'm conscious of time, but it follows on from what you were mentioning there, Dragan. Obviously, KWR run a lot of pilot studies, you know, if I'm not correct. So what do you see as the next interesting innovation that, you mentioned a lot of there's no silver bullet, but what do you see as the next big innovation that will play a big part in helping utilities manage their water better?
I think all of the utilities are on this digitalization path when they democratize their data within the organization. Before privatization, everything was on paper. And for some utility that's been lost, not digitized, but some managed to digitize even that, and they slowly moved into this. So one of the key things is to avoid these silos. And again, 20 years ago, you had leakage department, you have asset department, you have water quality, and all collected some data, and that data was being used within part of the organization. I mean, some utilities we worked with, you get to the control room and the control engineer has about 20 different pieces of software to get the data from when there is an alarm in the system. So that democratization of data and expertise through digital technologies, they're all on that path. Some are further ahead, some are behind, but I think this is the key for us. Somebody mentioned digital twins, development of asset management databases so that we can look into the behavior, that we have kind of awareness of what is happening with the system. I think all of that is happening. And again, Gordon mentioned remote sensing, all that data kind of being available to everybody within the organization is what is the key. I think we lost Lyle, but I guess Gordon or Simon can add something to this one.
Well, I was going to come in, Dragan, because that democratization piece, I think it's not only across the silos within the water utilities and even with the suppliers. I think it's with it's an openness generally, and inviting in citizen science and citizen regulation by water utilities as the guardians of kind of a lot of this data, but perhaps the supply chain too. Really just publishing that data generally and allowing others to see what we see so that they can come with their ideas and their innovations and their suggestions in a much more targeted way. So and I know lots of the water companies have been doing this, but in Yorkshire Water, we've built a connection over the last few years with the Open Data Institute, and been publishing huge amounts of data that was never published 5 years ago, millions of lines of leakage data, pollution, CSO discharge data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. About 20 data disclosures a year, I think it was last year. Quite big stuff and transformational, which is then out there as a resource for supply chain or anyone that's interested, academia, et cetera, to go and explore and really do some very granular assessment. To come back in a much more informed and targeted way with those solutions. So I think democratization in the broadest sense of the word has to be a real strength.
Yeah, I think the opening up of that data that you just touched on there. I mean, again, speaking from the gas sector originally, when the gas companies really got on board with innovation and started sharing data with the supply chain, I was a supplier in that era, and it transformed the supply chain in their ability to understand properly the problem and therefore come up with a proper solution. You can't just say, I want to fix leaks on pipes. You've got to know, right, which pipes, which materials, which diameters, which pressures, where are they located, urban, rural, etc. Those kind of data sets, once those data sets are shared and can somehow get out there, it's a real stimulus to innovation. And we've got Lyle back. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, I got my own technical problems, but yeah, no, sorry about that.
No, don't worry about it. Glad it's not just me. You make me feel better.
Yeah, well, it must be Leeds. It must be Leeds generally.
Something. There's a couple of really interesting questions in the chat bar thing. If we want to go into them.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dragan. Yeah.
So. I mean, I'll sort of jump back in. Apologies for that, but there's an interesting point made on the metering side by Graham, and he mentions increasing, overall costs and ultimately, the bills that end users receive for water and wastewater, and would that have an effect on reduction at the end of the day, or is it more of a short-term Is that more of a short-term solution?
Well, I guess my take from a utility is it's absolutely the right thing to do. Don't get me wrong. I just think it's a more nuanced argument and about pace and particularly technology. Again, it's not like we're talking about one meter. I guess I think the more we can have, we touched on it through the conversation a number of times, the more we can have the connection and the understanding of where water is being used and how that's happening at a really granular level, the more informed decisions we can then take in kind of how we manage that to the best low carbon, most resilient approaches, most affordable, efficient approaches. So I guess what I haven't really seen in the sector is much of the discussion about smart meter. I think we're still kind of a little bit 5-10 years ago, frankly, in the technology sense of the word. Into quite basic meters, but I guess because half the housing in Yorkshire still doesn't have a meter, and I think that's to say that's replicated nationally, albeit there are kind of highs and lows. But how do we maybe jump going from a basic meter into a smart meter? And again, could we integrate with the energy sector and kind of learn from there? I think they've had a bit of a hot and cold spell in kind of being the early runners there in some of the stuff they've done, haven't they? Excuse the pun. But could we integrate kind of more utility-based thinking with all the smart kind of Nest and other technology in the home and empower consumers as well as giving data to the managers, the utilities? I think there's lots to be explored there that really is an untapped potential.
And it is that, I think part of that potential is probably, to go back to Graham's question about increasing water bills. Yeah, I think I'd pay a bit more for my water. I think it is undervalued. I think I can't remember what the consumer engagement responses were like in the build up to PR19, but I'm sure there were lots of water companies that asked, would you pay more? And a good proportion of consumers came back and said yes, with a sort of order of magnitude. That didn't follow through into a regulatory settlement. Whether it helped influence final settlements, I don't know, final determinations. But there's the sort of the ongoing commercialization as well. So if you can invest in smart metering and as Gordon says, getting into sort of Nest and other packages in the home and make it more integrated, there are options for water companies to think about other services that can add value, that can generate some revenue. There's a whole commercial element to this that's difficult in a regulatory environment, but unless we have a significant step change in the price per cubic meter of water, we're still going to be back at square one, I think. Or the price of technology, which does come down dramatically over time. As smart water meters become lower cost and rolled out on a much larger scale, perhaps we see the price point come down and it becomes a no-brainer to fit a smart meter. We're just not there yet. Maybe we will be in 5 years or 10 years. Who knows?
I think smart meters are probably the ideal goal that we could aim at, and then combining energy and water. Again, 25% of the water is heated in the household, and if you reduce the usage of that one, shorter shower times, you reduce the energy usage, which is much more expensive. So that's where the customers can get the benefit. But as you said, Simon, this particular regulatory regime doesn't allow that diversification. So it's very difficult for utilities to do that. But I would also go back, smart meters ideal, but the point is that engaging customer can be on a much more regular basis, even without smart meter. If you're reading your meters every 6 months or every 3 months, if that letter or email comes up with comparison how much more they use than their neighbors with a nudge, so-called nudge effect, we could get much better understanding from the customer point of view where they're using and how they're using water. So we don't have to wait for the smart meters.
There's another question as well there from Graham then, saying that why would and we'll keep it specific to the UK for now, obviously with Gordon on, but why would a water company in the UK be interested in reducing a business's costs, for example, when ultimately what we're looking to do is investing into networks and creating a more sustainable network from that side?
Well, I can give you the utility view. Again, I think first of all we need to break up the UK, a very different model in Scotland and in Wales, where they are not profit-making companies in that sense and have a very direct interest in purely serving customers. But even the English companies where they are technically profit-making, some of us maybe, then there's a number of reasons why that's still really critical to us. One, there's a fundamental legitimacy piece for the English water sector because of that unique piece. And it's absolutely not about purely maximising profits. I think we've seen that very loudly and clearly over the last 3 to 5 years, and repositioning the whole English sector within that. So I would call it the moral license to operate is just as important as the kind of tangible license to operate that we do get from as water companies. And therefore we have to keep bills as efficiently as we can be. And there's plenty of regulatory mechanisms to ensure the fairness and the focus on that. And absolutely there, so it should be. Equally, there's kind of, whichever way you look at the sector, and regardless of whether you're a privatized operator or a public operator, there's always a resource constraint, and the consumer is always paying in one way or another, whether it's through taxation, through bills, or whatever mechanism. It all comes back to everything we do is ultimately funded by society, and there is always going to be a constraint, an envelope within which we have to operate. And actually, any water utility wants to spend that 10 times over. We could make a case for all sorts of investment in any number of activities, which would be really the right thing to do for the infrastructure, for the environmental good, for social benefit. So we're always prioritising massively hard down to what is the most important thing to spend on. So therefore, if we can take out 20% of that expenditure in efficiency and bring in 20% of new expenditure on something else, you've basically delivered more for less and good. So even in the privatized model, I think it's very easy to be quite cynical here about shareholder returns and dividends. For me, that's a complete distraction, and we're talking about the very thin end of the wedge. Let's focus on the big piece. And there's any number of reasons why we should be focusing on efficiency and value. And to Graham's other point, should we be steadily pushing up the value of water? I mean, I do value in the broadest sense, not just the pound note on the bill. I think is absolutely, as we touched on at the beginning of the conversation, it's just not high enough on the agenda for quite how fundamental it is to us all, because ultimately services are largely good, resilient and affordable. In Yorkshire, there are 20-25% of our bills we would put a class as struggling to pay their bill. Huge proportion, really. So there is a huge affordability angle which we can't forget for those that are struggling, where customers tell us £5 over the year on their bill actually is really important to them and will be the choice at a point in the year where they have some more food or they're heating versus paying that water bill. And so there's a real social dilemma there in that sense. For the majority of people, though, most people tell us they would quite happily pay £5 or £10 more on their bill if they could see that it wasn't going to profits, it was going into environmental and social improvements, infrastructure investment for the long term, all of those things. So I wonder how we can start to maybe be smarter in our tariffing, and it's not just a one blanket brush across a region, but actually can we start tailoring to different audiences? Could we offer a low carbon water package, for example? Could we we already have various affordability mechanisms, but could we strengthen that and have the richer paying more and so on? So I think, again, there's perhaps innovation for the theme of this session in tariffing is another thing that we need to explore.
I mean, just further to that then, what was your take on the futures contracts that were made available in the US? Did you hear about that?
Sorry, what was that, Lyle?
So there was the futures contracts made available on the stock exchange in the US, and obviously that is in an effort to mitigate rising water prices. So I'd be interested to get your take on it and what sort of your opinion on that was.
Well, I don't know if the other guys have a view. Personally, I'm no technical expert, but again, I think there's got a lot of innovation going on in how we raise finance. forms of sustainable and green finance coming in from us and other players in the sector. I think those future links, maybe I guess what Simon said earlier about compromise for the regulatory model, which I think would be interesting to have a regulator in the room to hear what they said to that. But I guess our starting premise is always, how do we protect the customer first and foremost, and what is the right balance of short-term protection and long-term protection, and the fair balance of a return for a shareholder or an investor community. So I think those futures markets are maybe an innovative way of adding a degree of protection that gives some security through a uncertain future.
Well, in water-scarce regions around the world, don't forget that we already have water markets. That's in California and in Australia that are functioning water markets. But it's very difficult to imagine how that would be rolled out in the areas where the water is not scarce. And I would link it back to scarcity costing or pricing. Prices, because if you remember the situation in Cape Town a couple of years ago, they would have paid through the roof if they could get more water into the city, and they went down to 50 liters per household. So that gives you an idea how the context changes the attitudes towards payment, towards trading, whatever you call it. So having smart meters could actually allow better pricing that may be related to the scarcity situation in the area, or other customer kind of socioeconomic characteristics.
Yeah. I mean, Simon, any further comments? I'm very conscious of time, but any further comments?
I was just going to add that I do like the idea of different tariffs, in the same way you would choose where to invest your pension funds or perhaps an energy provider. Why not be able to have a tariff for the water sector for people that choose to, first of all, have something that is low carbon, and demonstrable at that. And you do pay, £5, £10 a year more, and people that really want to help influence change can do so in a transparent way through a very simple tariff. So whilst others who are struggling to make ends meet can get all the support they need and clean, safe drinking water and sanitation 24/7.
Yeah. I mean, it really does make sense. Obviously, it's more of an incentive at the end of the day, isn't it, for the end user to reduce their overall consumption. But yeah, I mean, we'll have to wrap things up there. So I just want to say, obviously, a special thanks to you three, obviously, for taking the time. Also, a special mention to Smart Water Magazine, who have actually been a partner of us throughout this sort of campaign. But yeah, no, honestly, thank you very much for your time. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye for now.
Goodbye now. Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Yeah.